Today, we're going to talk about one of the most incredible economic turnarounds of the last century. We're talking about India's journey, really from a totally state controlled economy to a global industrial powerhouse.
So, you have to ask, how did that even happen? How does a country that's so tightly wrapped in regulations manage to unleash its economic potential in what's a pretty short amount of time? That's the big question we're going to unpack right now. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Our story really kicks off right after India's independence in 1947. The new nation had this monumental task ahead of it. How do we build a modern, self-sufficient industrial base basically from scratch? And the master plan for that whole mission was this thing called the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956. Honestly, you can think of it as the economics constitution for India at the time. Its two main goals: self-reliance and putting the government firmly, and I mean firmly, in the driver's seat of all industrial growth. So, to make this happen, the government literally divided the entire economy into three buckets. First, you had Schedule A. This was for the really core strategic stuff. Think atomic energy, defense, 17 industries that were only for the state, no one else. Then came Schedule B. Here, the state would take the lead, but the private sector could help out a bit. And finally, Schedule C was everything else. This was left for private companies, but, and this is a big but, it was still under heavy government regulation. This whole structure basically cemented the government's total control over the entire industrial landscape. And this top-down system, as you can imagine, led into what we now call the era of control. It was defined by this incredibly complex and often, let's be honest, suffocating web of rules and regulations. Just to give you a feel for how rigid this was, get this quote. You needed written permission, a license, not just to start a factory, but for every single item you plan to make. It's kind of mind-boggling. This system, which micromanaged nearly every part of doing business, very quickly earned a famous nickname: the License Raj. Now, this control wasn't just a vague idea. It was enforced by a trio of really powerful laws. You had the Industries Act, which made licenses mandatory for pretty much everything. Then there was the MRTP Act, which was designed to stop any one company from getting too big. And finally, the FARA Act, which basically put a stranglehold on any foreign money coming in or going out. Together, these three laws created this ironclad system that decided who could build what, where they could build it, and whose money they could use to do it. For decades, this was just how things were. But the system was creating huge inefficiencies, it was stifling growth, and by the early 1990s, the whole model was just creaking under the strain. It was becoming completely unsustainable, and it pushed the country right to the edge of an economic cliff. And in 1991, it all came to a head. The breaking point arrived. India was staring down a massive balance of payments crisis. What that means is the country was literally running out of foreign currency to pay for essential stuff like oil. India was on the verge of defaulting on its loans. This crisis, this moment of near collapse, was the dramatic trigger that forced a radical, game-changing shift. And boy, was it a shift. This moment was absolutely pivotal. The new industrial policy of 1991 was a complete 180. The License Raj pretty much dismantled overnight for most industries. Foreign investment, it went from being heavily restricted to being welcomed with automatic approvals. The focus flipped from the public sector to the private sector, and the goal changed completely, from controlling monopolies to actually encouraging competition. It was nothing short of an economic revolution. So, what happens when you throw the floodgates open like that? Let's take a look at the direct impact of these massive reforms, both the good and, well, the not so good. The upsides were pretty immediate and, frankly, pretty powerful. Just getting rid of all that licensing paperwork injected a huge dose of competition into the economy. All of a sudden, companies had to get more efficient to survive. Lower taxes and simpler rules brought in a wave of foreign investment and technology. And new laws like the Competition Act were created to make sure the new open market stayed fair. But, a change this huge and this fast is never going to be perfectly smooth. It came with some real challenges. Investment, for example, poured into certain sectors but left others behind. Modernization was great, but it also meant that some workers lost their jobs to new machines and technologies. It just goes to show how complex it is to move from a totally controlled economy to a competitive one. There are always growing pains. But here's where the story gets really interesting today. It didn't stop in 1991. That spirit of reform has now trickled down from the central government to India's states, and it's created a whole new kind of competition. So instead of just one big national policy, what we see now is this fascinating race between the states themselves. Each one is kind of like a little laboratory for industrial policy. You've got Andhra Pradesh, for example, promising they can get a new business set up in just 21 days. Karnataka is all in on digitization and transparency. Tamil Nadu is using subsidies to create jobs, while Telangana is offering special incentives for women entrepreneurs. Every state is now fighting to be the best, most attractive place for a company to set up shop. So, what does this new state-level competition actually look like in the real world with real people? Well, it looks like this number, 170%. What is that? That is the staggering, almost unbelievable increase in jobs in Tamil Nadu's auto manufacturing sector in just 8 years. How? Well, the state's policies actively created specialized parks for suppliers and clusters for auto companies. This is proof that these policies aren't just abstract ideas on a piece of paper. They are creating thousands of real jobs and totally transforming regional economies. Which brings us right here to our final thought. India's industrial journey has been incredible. It's gone from absolute, total central control to a massive nationwide great unlocking, and now to this dynamic, fascinating race between its own states. So the real question is, what's next? What will this new era of internal competition bring? And what is the next chapter in India's amazing industrial story?